The dust swirled across the barren street of Montezuma, Colorado, as Jackson Sterling rode into town, his eyes as cold as the metal on his hip, and his heart long ago buried with the family he'd lost. The year was 1875, and the West had taken everything from him: his wife, his child, his faith in humanity. All he wanted now was solitude, a place to forget, and enough whiskey to numb the memories that haunted his dreams. The town of Montezuma sat nestled in the mountains, once bustling with mining prospects, but now settling into a quieter existence as the silver boom waned. Jackson had chosen it precisely for that reason, a dying town for a man who felt half dead himself. "New faces ain't common these days," the livery owner remarked as Jackson dismounted his dappled gray stallion. "Just passing through, looking to stay," Jackson replied curtly, handing over payment. "Got any recommendations for land? Something remote?" The older man scratched his beard. "Old Carver place might suit. Nobody's been keen on it. 5 miles out of town, got a decent cabin, though it needs work. Creek runs through it. Man died there last winter, natural causes," he added hastily. "Land's going cheap." By sunset, Jackson had purchased the property with a portion of the money he'd saved during his years working cattle drive, and occasional stints as a town deputy. The cabin was indeed in need of repair. Roof leaked in 2 places, the porch sagged, and the fireplace needed clearing, but the isolation suited him perfectly. No neighbors for miles, just the whispering pines and distant mountain peaks to keep him company. For 3 weeks, Jackson worked from dawn until dusk, repairing what time and neglect had damaged. His days fell into a solitary rhythm: work on the cabin, hunt or fish for food, exercise his horse, and end each night with enough whiskey to ensure sleep came without dreams. He ventured into Montezuma only when supplies demanded it, speaking little, learning names only when necessary. The townsfolk quickly learned to leave him be. Some speculated he was running from the law, others guessed he was nursing a broken heart. All knew enough to respect the invisible boundary he'd drawn around himself. On a crisp autumn morning, Jackson rode into town for supplies, his list tucked into his shirt pocket. The general store was mostly empty when he entered, save for Mrs. Miller selecting fabric and the owner, Frank Billings, arranging canned goods. "Morning, Sterling," Frank nodded, the closest thing to friendship Jackson had permitted. Jackson returned the greeting with a slight nod, beginning to gather his supplies when the bell above the door chimed. He paid it no mind until he heard it, a laugh, clear and genuine, ringing through the store like the first notes of a forgotten melody. Against his will, Jackson turned. A woman stood just inside the doorway, her hand covering her mouth as though surprised by her own outburst. Beside her, a young boy of about 10 years was grinning, clearly the source of whatever had caused her amusement. "I am sorry," she said, her eyes a warm hazel meeting those of Mrs. Miller and Frank. "Timothy here just told me the most ridiculous story about his encounter with a mountain lion that turned out to be Mrs. Peterson's cat." The boy looked sheepishly at his boots. "It was dark." The woman laughed again, and something in Jackson's chest shifted uncomfortably. It had been so long since he'd heard joy that unrestrained, that genuine. Her laugh was like water finding a crack in parched earth. "Hannah Pierce," Mrs. Miller called warmly, "come look at this fabric. Would be perfect for that schoolroom curtain you mentioned." Jackson watched from the corner of his eye as the woman Hannah moved toward Mrs. Miller. She was perhaps 25, with auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a practical bonnet. Her dress was simple but well made, a deep blue that complemented her fair complexion. There was something about her that seemed both strong and gentle simultaneously. "Mr. Sterling," Frank interrupted his thoughts. "You need something else." Jackson realized he'd been standing motionless, his hand frozen above a sack of coffee beans. "No," he muttered, continuing to gather his supplies with deliberate focus. As he placed his items on the counter, the woman approached with her own selections. Jackson stepped aside, tipping his hat slightly in acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said, her voice as melodic as her laugh. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Hannah Pierce, the new schoolteacher." Jackson hesitated, his natural instinct to avoid conversation warring with basic courtesy. "Jackson Sterling," he finally replied. "Just moved out to the old Carver place. All the way out there." Her eyebrows rose. "Must be peaceful." "That's the point," he replied, more curtly than he'd intended. If she was offended, she didn't show it. Instead, her eyes showed a flicker of understanding. "Sometimes solitude is necessary," she said quietly. "Though in my experience it rarely gives us what we think it will." Before he could respond, Frank returned with her change, and the boy Timothy tugged at her sleeve, eager to continue their errands. "It was nice meeting you, Mr. Sterling," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I hope you find what you're looking for out at the Carver place." Jackson watched her leave, the bell chiming again as the door closed behind her. He paid for his supplies and loaded them onto his horse, irritated to find himself still thinking of that laugh, that brief moment when the world had seemed less bleak. "The schoolteacher arrived last month," Frank commented as Jackson prepared to leave. "Widow with her brother's boy. Husband died in the war, I heard. She's good for the town, got the school running proper again." Jackson merely nodded, unwilling to admit his curiosity. "Good day," he said, mounting his horse and turning toward home, determined to push the encounter from his mind. But that night, as he sat on his newly repaired porch watching darkness claim the land, Jackson found Hannah Pierce's laugh echoing in his memory. It was an unwelcome intrusion into the carefully constructed silence of his life. He poured another whiskey, drinking it faster than usual, hoping to drown out the sound. 2 days later, Jackson was forced to return to town when his axe handle broke mid-swing. The blacksmith could repair it, but it would take several hours. With time to kill, Jackson reluctantly entered the town's only restaurant, a simple establishment run by a Chinese immigrant named Y. Chen. The place was busier than expected, and Jackson scanned for an empty table. His gaze froze when he spotted Hannah Pierce seated alone, papers spread before her as she ate. For a moment, he considered leaving, but his growling stomach made the decision for him. He selected a table as far from her as possible, ordering coffee and whatever stew Y had prepared. He'd nearly made it through his meal unnoticed when a shadow fell across his table. "Mr. Sterling," Hannah said, a stack of papers clutched to her chest. "Would you mind if I joined you? All the other tables are occupied." Jackson looked up, instinctively wanting to refuse, but a quick glance confirmed she was right. The restaurant had filled completely. "Suit yourself," he managed, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Thank you." She settled into the seat, placing her papers beside her plate. "I've been grading arithmetic lessons. The children are making progress, but I fear some find numbers more challenging than words." Jackson nodded, unsure what response was expected. "You don't talk much, do you?" she observed, but her tone held no judgment. "Not much to say." A small smile played at her lips. "I find most people have plenty to say if given the right topic." She took a bite of her meal. "What brings you to Montezuma, Mr. Sterling?" "Peace and quiet," he answered pointedly. To his surprise, she laughed, that same clear, genuine sound that had caught his attention before. "Well, I'm certainly disrupting that at the moment, aren't I? I apologize." Despite himself, Jackson felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Your laugh," he found himself saying. "It's unexpected." Her head tilted slightly. Unexpected. In a place like this, people don't laugh much in these parts. Perhaps that's precisely why they should, she replied. Life gives us enough reasons to frown without us adding more. She studied him for a moment. You've seen your share of hardship, I'd wager. Jackson stiffened. Haven't we all, indeed? She nodded, a shadow crossing her features. I lost my husband at Gettysburg. Henry was a good man, brave to a fault. Then my brother and his wife to fever last year, leaving Timothy in my care. Jackson remained silent, uncomfortable with her openness, yet unable to dismiss it entirely. I don't share that to invite pity, she continued. Only to say that I understand the weight of loss, but I've found that allowing joy even in small moments doesn't dishonor grief. It simply prevents grief from claiming everything. Jackson stared into his coffee. Some losses can't be overcome. Perhaps not overcome, she agreed softly, but lived with eventually, carried differently. Their conversation was interrupted by Timothy bursting through the door, his face alight with excitement. Aunt Hannah. Sheriff Jenkins caught the men who stole Mr. Davenport's horses. Hannah smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. That's wonderful news. Did you finish your chores at Mrs. Miller's? Yes, madam. She gave me a penny for helping carry in her firewood. He noticed Jackson then, his expression turning curious. Hello, sir. Timothy, this is Mr. Sterling, Hannah introduced. He's living at the old Carver place. All the way out there. Timothy's eyes widened. Billy Thompson says it's haunted. Despite himself, Jackson's mouth quirked. No ghosts, just a stubborn raccoon that thinks the porch is his. Timothy grinned. We had raccoons back home in Pennsylvania. One stole my ma's laundry right off the line. Timothy, Hannah chided gently. I'm sure Mr. Sterling isn't interested in our raccoon stories. Jackson surprised himself by saying, I don't mind. Something in Hannah's expression softened at his words. For the next 10 minutes, Jackson found himself engaged in conversation with the boy about wildlife, fishing, and the challenges of keeping animals away from gardens. Timothy was bright and curious, asking intelligent questions about Jackson's cabin and the surrounding land. We should let Mr. Sterling finish his meal in peace, Hannah finally said, gathering her papers. Thank you for sharing your table. You're welcome, Jackson replied, realizing he meant it as they left. Hannah turned back briefly. The school is having a harvest celebration next Friday evening. The whole town is invited, even those seeking peace and quiet. Her eyes held a gentle challenge. Sometimes community is what heals us, Mr. Sterling. Jackson made no commitment, merely nodding in acknowledgement. But as he rode back to his cabin later that afternoon, his repaired axe secured to his saddle, he found himself thinking about her words, and about her laugh, which had somehow found its way into his thoughts again. The following week passed in the usual manner, yet Jackson found his solitude less comforting than before. Twice, he caught himself wondering what Hannah might be teaching her students that day, or whether Timothy had caught any fish in the creek that ran through town. These thoughts irritated him. He'd come to Montezuma to escape connections, not form new ones. Friday arrived, and Jackson told himself firmly he would not attend the school celebration. He had work to do. The roof still needed patching before winter truly set in. But as the afternoon waned, he found himself restless, the silence of his cabin suddenly oppressive rather than peaceful. Damn it all, he muttered to himself, setting aside his tools and washing up. Before he could reconsider, he saddled his horse and rode toward town, telling himself he was only going because he needed more nails anyway. The school building was lit up with lanterns, its yard decorated with autumn leaves and harvested pumpkins. Children darted about while adults gathered in groups, the atmosphere warm with conversation and laughter. Jackson hesitated at the edge of the gathering, already regretting his decision. "Mr. Sterling," Timothy's voice called out. The boy dashed over, his face flushed with excitement. "You came." "Aunt Hannah said you might, but I wasn't sure." "Just passing through," Jackson said awkwardly. "You have to try the apple cider, and Mrs. Miller made her famous pecan pie. Come on." The boy tugged at his sleeve with surprising boldness. Reluctantly, Jackson allowed himself to be led into the schoolyard. Several townspeople nodded in greeting, though some eyed him curiously. He'd been in Montezuma over a month but had barely spoken to anyone besides Frank at the general store. "You came." Hannah's voice came from behind him. She wore a dress of deep green, her hair arranged more elaborately than he'd seen before, with a few copper tendrils framing her face. "Needed nails," he offered lamely. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "Of course." The general store being closed this evening, naturally you'd come looking at a school celebration. Jackson felt his face warm slightly. "Your nephew is persuasive. He takes after his mother in that regard," she replied. "Come, let me introduce you properly to some of the townsfolk." "You can't remain a mystery forever, Mr. Sterling." "Jackson," he found himself saying. "Just Jackson is fine." Her smile widened. "Jackson, then, and I'm Hannah." For the next hour, Jackson found himself drawn into the community in a way he'd actively avoided since arriving. Hannah introduced him to parents of her students, the town doctor, and Sheriff Jenkins, who seemed particularly interested in Jackson's previous work as a deputy in Kansas. "We could use a man with experience," Jenkins commented. "Town's mostly peaceful, but we get the occasional troublemaker passing through." "I'm not looking for work," Jackson replied automatically. The sheriff shrugged. "Offer stands if you change your mind." As the evening progressed, Jackson found himself seated on a bench near the edge of the schoolyard, observing the festivities with less discomfort than expected. Timothy had convinced him to try 3 different desserts, and Jackson had to admit Mrs. Miller's pecan pie deserved its reputation. "Penny for your thoughts," Hannah said, settling beside him with a cup of cider in each hand. She offered one to him. "You look less pained than when you arrived. I consider that progress." Jackson accepted the cider with a nod of thanks. "It's been a long time since I attended anything like this." "May I ask what happened?" Her voice was gentle. "What drove you to seek solitude so determinedly?" Jackson stared into his cup, the words he'd never spoken aloud threatening to spill forth. Perhaps it was the warm glow of the lanterns, or the distant music from the fiddle player, or simply Hannah's presence beside him. Something made him answer. "I had a wife, Sarah, and a daughter, Ellie. 4 years ago, while I was serving as deputy in Oak Ridge, Kansas, a group of outlaws rode through. I was out of town, tracking a horse thief." His voice turned hollow. "They robbed the bank. Sarah was there, depositing the money from her dressmaking business. When she recognized one of them, a man I'd arrested months earlier who'd escaped custody, he shot her. No reason, just revenge against me." Hannah's intake of breath was soft but audible. "Ellie was at home with a fever. When I returned 3 days later, I found her." His throat closed around the words. She'd been too weak to get help or food, died alone calling for her mother, for me. Hannah's hand found his, her fingers warm against his cold ones. "Jackson, I'm so sorry. I tracked those men for 2 years, found them one by one, brought some to justice. Others." He trailed off, not needing to elaborate, and it didn't help, she said softly. "It wasn't a question." "No," he admitted. "Nothing did, so I decided to stop trying, stop feeling altogether." "How's that working for you?" There was no judgment in her tone, only genuine curiosity. For the first time in years, Jackson felt the ghost of a smile touch his lips. Was working fine until someone laughed in a general store and reminded me there might still be good things in this world. Hannah's hand tightened on his. There are, Jackson. There are terrible things too, unspeakable losses, but there are still good things worth experiencing. Their eyes met, and Jackson felt something shift within him, a wall beginning to crumble, allowing in the first tentative ray of light. The moment was interrupted by Timothy racing up. Aunt Hannah, Mr. Chen brought mooncakes. He says they're special for the autumn festival in China. Hannah smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. We'll be right there, Timothy. As the boy dashed off, Hannah stood still holding Jackson's hand. Will you join us? Or have you endured enough socializing for one evening? Jackson surprised himself by rising. I think I can manage a little more. Her answering smile was like sunrise after the longest night. The weeks that followed saw a gradual but unmistakable change in Jackson's life. Though he still lived at his cabin, he found himself riding into Montezuma more frequently. Sometimes he'd bring game to trade at the general store, staying to chat with Frank or helping Wei Chen repair a broken chair at the restaurant. Other days, he'd find himself lingering near the schoolhouse as lessons ended, offering to walk Hannah and Timothy home or carrying their books. Hannah never pushed him to talk about Sarah or Ellie again, but she listened when he voluntarily shared memories, the way Sarah could mimic any bird call she heard, or how Ellie had insisted on naming every stray animal that crossed their path. In return, she told him about her life in Pennsylvania, her brief but happy marriage to Henry, and the challenges and joys of raising Timothy. He's a good boy, Jackson commented one afternoon as they watched Timothy fishing in the creek that ran behind the schoolhouse. Smart, too. He is, Hannah agreed, pride evident in her voice. He's had to adjust to so much loss. Children are remarkably resilient, though sometimes I worry the burden is too heavy. You're doing right by him, Jackson assured her, giving him stability, education. Hannah sighed softly. I try. It's not always easy being both mother and father to him. There are things I can't teach him, things about becoming a man. Jackson watched the boy's determined concentration as he attempted to land a small trout. Would you mind if I took him fishing sometime? Properly, I mean. There's a spot on my land where the trout are big enough to make even an experienced angler proud. The hope that lit Hannah's face made something warm unfurl in Jackson's chest. He would love that, truly. The following Saturday, Jackson arrived at Hannah's small rented house just after dawn. Timothy was already waiting on the porch, fishing pole in hand, practically bouncing with excitement. Are we really going to catch big trout, Mr. Sterling? He asked as they rode double on Jackson's horse, the boy securely in front of him. If we're quiet enough and patient enough, Jackson replied, and you can call me Jackson. The day was one of unexpected pleasure for Jackson. Teaching Timothy to read the water, to cast his line just so, to wait with stillness and attention, it awakened memories of his own father teaching him. Good memories that, for once, didn't immediately sour with grief. When Timothy landed his first large trout, his whoop of delight echoed across the water. The boy's unbridled joy was infectious, and Jackson found himself laughing, truly laughing for the first time in years. They returned to town as the sun began to set, Timothy chattering excitedly about every detail of their day, the string of fish proudly displayed across the saddle. Hannah was waiting on her porch, her face breaking into a smile at the sight of them. We caught 7 fish, Aunt Hannah, Timothy exclaimed, scrambling down from the horse. And Jackson showed me how to clean them too. Can we have them for supper? Can Jackson stay? Hannah's eyes met Jackson's over the boy's head. That would be lovely if Jackson would like to join us. Jackson hesitated only briefly. I'd be honored. That evening, as they shared the trout fried with cornmeal and herbs from Hannah's small garden, Jackson felt something he'd thought forever lost: the warmth of belonging, of sharing a meal with people who genuinely enjoyed his company. After Timothy went to bed, Jackson and Hannah sat on her small porch, the autumn night cool but not uncomfortable. "Thank you," she said softly, "for today. I haven't seen him this happy in a very long time." "I enjoyed it too," Jackson admitted. "More than I expected to." Hannah studied him in the faint light spilling from the window. "You're good with him, natural." Jackson looked down at his hands. "I always wanted a son. After Ellie, Sarah and I had talked about trying again, but—" Hannah's hand found his, a gesture that had become familiar between them. "You would have been a wonderful father, Jackson. You still could be someday." The implication hung in the air between them, delicate as morning mist. Jackson turned his hand to clasp hers properly, his thumb tracing small circles on her skin. "Hannah," he began, uncertain how to express what he was feeling. "It's all right," she said gently. "There's no rush. We have time." But time, as they soon discovered, was not always a guaranteed commodity on the frontier. 2 weeks later, Jackson was in town delivering a deer he'd shot to be butchered when a commotion near the bank caught his attention. 3 mounted men, bandanas pulled up over their faces, were emerging from the building, guns drawn and saddlebags heavy. "Bank robbery!" Someone shouted, and citizens scattered for cover. Jackson's hand automatically went to his hip, where he still carried his revolver out of habit. Sheriff Jenkins appeared from the jailhouse, rifle raised. "Drop those bags and put your hands up," Jenkins called. One of the robbers fired in response, the bullet splintering the post beside the sheriff. The exchange of gunfire that followed was chaotic and brief. Jackson ducked behind a water trough, drawing his own weapon. His blood ran cold when he realized the school was directly in the line of fire, not 50 yards away. The door stood open, children's voices audible even over the gunshots. Without hesitation, Jackson broke from cover, firing strategically to draw the robbers' attention away from the school. One robber wheeled his horse toward Jackson, firing wildly. Jackson felt the burn as a bullet grazed his upper arm, but he maintained his position, returning fire with the precision that had made him an effective deputy. The robber tumbled from his saddle as Jackson's bullet found its mark. The other two, seeing their companion fall, spurred their horses down the street. Sheriff Jenkins and 2 townsmen gave chase, leaving Jackson to secure the fallen outlaw, but Jackson's thoughts were already racing toward the school. "Hannah!" he called, running toward the building, his wounded arm forgotten. He burst through the door to find Hannah standing protectively before her students, who were huddled at the back of the room. Her face was pale but determined, a small derringer clutched in her hand. "Jackson!" Relief flooded her features. "Are you hurt?" "Just a graze," he dismissed, scanning the room quickly. "Is everyone all right?" Hannah nodded, turning to comfort her frightened students. "It's over now, children. You're safe." Timothy broke from the group, running to embrace Jackson fiercely. "I was scared they might get you," the boy admitted, his voice muffled against Jackson's vest. Something in Jackson's chest expanded painfully at the boy's words, at the realization that Timothy had worried for him specifically. He placed his good hand on the boy's shoulder. "Takes more than some 2-bit outlaws to get the better of me." Later, after the town doctor had bandaged his arm and Sheriff Jenkins had returned, having caught one of the remaining robbers while the third escaped, Jackson found himself sitting in Hannah's kitchen. She insisted on cooking him supper, despite his protests that he was perfectly capable of returning to his cabin. "You were shot, Jackson," she said firmly, stirring a pot of stew. "You're not riding 5 miles with a wounded arm. You'll stay here tonight." In case you hadn't noticed, he replied dryly. "I've survived worse." Hannah turned to face him, her expression suddenly fierce. "Yes, and perhaps you've grown too accustomed to merely surviving. Today you could have been killed drawing those men's fire away from the school." "I couldn't let them hurt you," he said simply. "Or the children." "Why?" she challenged, setting down her spoon and approaching him. "Why risk your life for us?" Jackson met her gaze steadily. "Because you matter to me. Because I've spent 4 years hiding from life, and your laugh, your kindness, your determination reminded me there might be something worth living for after all." Hannah's breath caught. "Jackson." "I'm not good with words," he continued. "Not like you, but I think I might be falling in love with you, Hannah Pierce. And it terrifies me because the last time I loved someone, I lost everything." Hannah knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. "Love always involves risk," she said softly. "Always, but a life without it isn't really living. It's just existing." Jackson reached out to touch her cheek. "When I heard those shots and realized you were so close to the danger, I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too." "Then don't push me away," she whispered. "Don't retreat back to that cabin and that solitude." "I don't want to anymore," he admitted. Hannah's smile was radiant. "Good," she said, rising to press a gentle kiss to his lips. It was brief and chaste, but it sent warmth flooding through Jackson's entire being. When she pulled back, he found himself chasing her lips with his own, deepening the kiss with a hunger that surprised them both. Timothy's giggle from the doorway broke them apart. "Finally," the boy said, grinning. "Billy Thompson owes me a penny. He said you'd never kiss Aunt Hannah because you're too grumpy." Hannah's laugh, that same infectious sound that had first caught Jackson's attention, filled the kitchen as she rested her forehead against his shoulder. "Well," Jackson said, struggling to maintain a serious expression, "I wouldn't want you to lose a bet." That night, after Timothy was asleep and Hannah had changed Jackson's bandage, they sat together on her porch swing, her head resting against his good shoulder as they watched the stars emerge. "Sheriff Jenkins offered me a job today," Jackson said into the comfortable silence, "as his deputy." Hannah straightened slightly to look at him. "Are you considering it?" "I am," he nodded. "It would mean moving into town. The cabin's too far for daily rides. How do you feel about that?" She asked carefully. "About giving up your solitude?" Jackson considered the question honestly. "The cabin served its purpose. It gave me space to start healing, but I think I'm ready for more now." Hannah's smile was soft in the moonlight. "I'm glad." "There's something else," he continued, suddenly nervous. "It's too soon, I know that. We've only known each other a couple of months. But when I thought about possibly losing you today, I realized I don't want to waste any more time." He shifted to face her properly. "I'm not asking for an answer now, just for you to think about it. But someday, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife." Hannah's eyes widened, glistening with unshed tears. "Jackson Sterling," she breathed, "are you proposing to me?" "Poorly," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile, "but sincerely." She reached up to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "I don't need time to think about it." "Hannah, I love you," she interrupted. "I think I started falling the moment you grudgingly shared your table at Y's restaurant. I've seen your heart, Jackson. Your gentleness with Timothy, your courage today, the way you're fighting to find joy again despite everything you've lost." She took a deep breath. "So yes, I will marry you." "Not someday. Soon." Jackson gathered her in his arms, his heart fuller than he'd believed possible again. "I promise to do everything in my power to make you happy," he vowed. "You and Timothy both." "You already do," she whispered against his lips. The following Sunday, Jackson moved his belongings into town, taking a room above the general store until more permanent arrangements could be made. He started work as Deputy Sterling the next day, the badge feeling both familiar and new on his chest. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Montezuma, met with general approval and more than a few knowing smiles. Even Mrs. Miller, initially skeptical of the brooding man from the Carver place, admitted they made a fine match. "Always knew the right woman would thaw that frozen heart of yours," Frank commented as Jackson paid for supplies. "Hannah Pierce is a special one." Jackson couldn't disagree. Every day, he found new reasons to love her: her patience with struggling students, her fierce protectiveness of Timothy, the way she hummed while preparing meals, the softness in her eyes when she looked at him. They were married on the first day of December, a simple ceremony in the town's small church with Timothy standing proudly as Jackson's best man. The entire town attended, filling the church to capacity and spilling onto the steps outside. "You look beautiful," Jackson whispered as Hannah joined him at the altar, her dress a soft ivory adorned with lace she'd salvaged from her mother's wedding gown. "And you look happier than I've ever seen you," she replied, her eyes shining. As they spoke their vows, Jackson felt the last of his self-imposed isolation crumble away. The grief for Sarah and Ellie would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. Hannah had shown him it was possible to honor their memory while still embracing life and love again. That evening, after a celebration at the schoolhouse where the town had gathered to wish them well, Jackson carried his bride across the threshold of their new home, a sturdy two-bedroom house close to both the school and the sheriff's office. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sterling," he said, setting her gently on her feet in their parlor, Hannah's arms wound around his neck. "I never thought I'd marry again after Henry," she confessed. "Never thought I'd find someone who made me feel safe and cherished and understood." "I never thought I'd want to," Jackson replied honestly. "Until I heard you laugh that day in the store. Something in me recognized something in you. Maybe we're both survivors who refuse to be broken." "Or perhaps," she suggested, pressing a kiss to the corner of his mouth, "we're simply two people who found each other at exactly the right moment." Jackson gathered her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "I love you, Hannah Sterling." Her answering smile was everything he never knew he needed. "And I love you, Jackson Sterling, now and always." As winter deepened, Jackson and Hannah settled into married life with surprising ease. Timothy thrived with Jackson's steady male presence, eagerly absorbing everything from woodworking skills to tracking game in the snow. The boy took to calling him Pa almost immediately after the wedding, a development that brought unexpected tears to Jackson's eyes the first time it happened. The cabin outside town wasn't abandoned entirely. On occasional weekends, Jackson would take Hannah and Timothy there, teaching them both about living off the land. Hannah proved surprisingly adept at wilderness skills, her determination making up for lack of experience. "My father would approve of you," Jackson told her one evening as they sat on the cabin's porch, Timothy already asleep inside after an exhausting day of fishing and exploring. "He always said the measure of a person wasn't in how they handled comfort, but in how they faced challenges." Hannah leaned against him, watching the stars emerge above the pines. "I wish I could have met him. And Sarah and Ellie too." Jackson's arm tightened around her. "Sarah would have liked you. She had that same spark, that refusal to let life's difficulties dim her spirit." "I'm glad you can speak of them now," Hannah said softly. "That their memory brings something besides pain." "Because of you," he acknowledged. "You taught me it was possible to keep them in my heart without letting grief consume me." Spring arrived with renewal in more ways than one. As the mountains shed their snow and wildflowers began to carpet the meadows, Hannah discovered she was expecting their first child. "Are you certain?" Jackson asked, his voice catching as she shared the news one evening after Timothy was in bed. Hannah nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Dr. Foster confirmed it today. The baby should arrive in late October. Jackson dropped to his knees before her chair, resting his head against her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't fully name, joy and fear intertwined with a fierce protectiveness. Hannah's fingers carded gently through his hair. "Are you happy about this?" He looked up, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes. "More than I can express," he assured her. "It's just, you're afraid of loving someone so completely again," she finished for him. He nodded, always amazed at how well she understood him. "What if I fail this child as I failed Ellie?" Hannah framed his face with her hands. "Jackson, you did not fail Ellie. A terrible thing happened that was beyond your control. You can't carry that guilt forever." "I should have been there," he insisted, the old guilt surfacing. "And if you had been, you might have died alongside Sarah, leaving Ellie orphaned," Hannah reasoned gently. "We can't know what might have been. We can only live in what is." Jackson pressed a kiss to her palm. "How did you get so wise?" "Practice," she smiled. "And necessity. Grief can either teach us wisdom or destroy us. I chose the former, as have you." The news of Hannah's pregnancy was received with delight by the town. Timothy was ecstatic about becoming a big brother, immediately setting about making plans for teaching the baby everything he knew. "I'm going to be the best brother ever," he declared confidently. "Just like Uncle James was to you, Aunt Hannah, I mean, Ma." Hannah embraced him tightly. "You already are the best, Timothy. This baby is lucky to have you." As Hannah's pregnancy progressed, Jackson found himself experiencing a strange mixture of joy and resurfacing grief. Some nights, memories of Sarah's pregnancy with Ellie would rise unbidden, bringing with them waves of guilt that he was being given a second chance at fatherhood when he had failed so terribly the first time. Hannah, with her remarkable insight, recognized his struggle without him having to articulate it. One evening, she led him to the rocking chair she'd placed in what would become the nursery. "Sit," she instructed gently. When he complied, she took his hands and placed them on her rounded belly. "Feel that?" she asked as a distinct movement pressed against his palm. "That's our child, Jackson. A new life, a new beginning. I'm afraid," he admitted in the darkness. "Afraid I won't be able to protect this baby or you or Timothy." "Of course you are," she said simply. "Love always involves fear, but we can't let fear prevent us from embracing the gift we've been given." She knelt before him, her hands covering his. "Sarah and Ellie will always be part of your heart. This baby doesn't replace them. This is not betrayal, Jackson. It's continuance. It's choosing life." As always, her words penetrated the shadows of his doubt. Jackson pulled her carefully into his lap, cradling her and their unborn child close. "What did I ever do to deserve you? You opened your heart again," she whispered. "Even when it was the hardest thing in the world to do." The summer passed in a blur of preparations. Jackson threw himself into creating furniture for the nursery, a cradle, a chest for baby clothes, a chair to match Hannah's rocker. Timothy insisted on helping, his small hands becoming increasingly skilled under Jackson's patient guidance. "You're a natural teacher," Hannah observed one afternoon as she watched them work. "Perhaps you missed your calling as a schoolmaster." Jackson smiled at the thought. "I think I'll leave the formal education to you, but I do enjoy passing on what my father taught me." "Our children will be fortunate to learn from both of us," she replied, unconsciously resting her hand on her growing belly, children plural. The casual reference to a future with more than just this baby made Jackson's heart swell with possibilities he'd once thought forever closed to him. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, Hannah continued teaching, despite Jackson's concerns about her working so close to her time. Women have been working while carrying children since the beginning of time, she reminded him when he suggested she rest more. Besides, who would teach the children if I stopped now? The school board hasn't found a replacement yet. Jackson knew better than to argue when that determined look entered her eyes. Instead, he made sure to walk her to and from school each day, and enlisted the older girls to help keep the classroom in order so Hannah wouldn't have to exert herself unnecessarily. On a crisp October morning, with the first dusting of snow on the distant peaks, Hannah woke Jackson before dawn, her hand gripping his arm tightly. "It's time," she said simply, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. Jackson was immediately alert, the preparations they'd discussed springing into action. He woke Timothy, instructing him to run for Dr. Foster while he helped Hannah through the increasingly powerful contractions. "Remember," Hannah gasped between pains, "women have been doing this forever." Jackson kissed her damp forehead. "Not all women are as strong as you, my love." The labor progressed quickly. By mid-morning, the doctor had arrived, and Timothy had been sent to stay with Mrs. Miller. By early afternoon, the first cries of their child filled the bedroom. "A son, doctor," Foster announced, placing the red-faced, squalling infant on Hannah's chest. "A healthy boy." Jackson stared in wonder at the tiny being they had created 10 perfect fingers, a shock of dark hair, and lungs that testified to his vigor. Tears blurred his vision as Hannah guided his hand to touch their son's cheek. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the joy of the moment. "He's perfect," Jackson managed, his voice thick with emotion. "You're perfect." Later, with Hannah resting and their son, whom they named James Henry Sterling, after both their fathers sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Jackson sat in the rocking chair beside the bed, watching over his family. A profound sense of gratitude washed over him, along with the certainty that Sarah and Ellie would have wanted this for him, this second chance at happiness, at family. Timothy was allowed to return home that evening, his approach to the baby a mixture of awe and protective pride. "He's so small," the boy whispered, peering into the cradle. "Was I that small? Even smaller," Hannah smiled from her bed. "You were born early." Timothy reached out a tentative finger to touch the baby's hand. To everyone's delight, James reflexively grasped it, his tiny fingers curling around his brother's. "He knows I'm his brother," Timothy breathed, his face illuminated with joy. "Of course he does," Jackson affirmed, resting a hand on Timothy's shoulder. "And he knows you'll always look out for him, just as I'll always look out for both of you." The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustments as they all adapted to life with a newborn. James proved to be a good-natured baby, though he made his hunger and discomfort known with impressive volume when necessary. Jackson found himself discovering new depths of love he hadn't known were possible. The simple act of holding his son while Hannah rested, or changing a diaper with fumbling but increasingly confident hands, or walking the floor at night when James was fussy. Each moment connected him more deeply to this new life they'd created. Hannah recovered quickly, her natural resilience serving her well. By December, she was speaking of returning to teaching after the new year, though she planned to bring James with her for feeding. "The older girls can help mind him when I'm teaching," she explained. "And I've spoken with the school board about hiring an assistant. Mrs. Peterson's daughter, Elizabeth, is interested. She's finishing her schooling in Denver next month." As Christmas approached, Jackson found himself reflecting on the extraordinary change in his life over the past year. From solitary existence in a remote cabin to husband, father of 2, and respected deputy, the transformation was almost beyond comprehension. On Christmas Eve, after Timothy and James were asleep. Jackson and Hannah sat before their fireplace, sharing a rare moment of quiet. "I have something for you," Jackson said, reaching into his pocket. "I wanted to give it to you privately." He handed her a small wooden box he'd crafted himself. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a locket of silver, intricately engraved with vines and flowers. Hannah gasped softly. "Jackson, it's beautiful." "Open it," he encouraged. Inside were two tiny portraits, one of Timothy grinning widely and one of James, his infant face peaceful in sleep. "How did you manage this?" she asked, touching the images reverently. "That photographer who passed through last month," he explained. "I commissioned him secretly. Do you like it?" "I love it," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's perfect." Jackson fastened the locket around her neck, then drew her into his arms. "1 year ago, I was alone in that cabin, convinced I'd never feel anything again except grief and anger. Then you laughed in a general store, and everything changed." Hannah turned in his embrace to face him, her fingers tracing the contours of his face that had become so dear to her. "When I came to Montezuma, I was focused only on providing for Timothy, on surviving. I wasn't looking for love." "Neither was I," he smiled. "It found us anyway." "Thank goodness it did," she replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Later that night, with Hannah sleeping peacefully beside him and their sons safe in their beds, Jackson offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the family he'd been given, and the love that had found him when he least expected it. Spring arrived again, bringing with it James's first smiles and giggles, Timothy's growing confidence at school, and new opportunities for the Sterling family. Sheriff Jenkins, approaching his 60th year, began talking of retirement, hinting broadly that Jackson would make an excellent successor. "The town trusts you," he told Jackson as they made their morning rounds. "They've seen how you handle yourself in a crisis, how fair you are with troublemakers. The town council would vote for you in a heartbeat." Jackson considered the possibility with measured interest. The role would mean more responsibility, but also more stability for his family. Hannah, when he discussed it with her, was supportive but cautious. "It's more dangerous than being deputy," she noted as they walked along the creek behind their house, James strapped to her chest and Timothy skipping stones ahead of them. "But if it's what you want, I'll support you." Jackson watched his older son's delight as a stone skipped 5 times across the water. "What I want is what's best for all of us," he replied. "Being sheriff would mean better pay, more security for you and the boys." Hannah's hand found his. "We have security in each other, Jackson. Whatever you decide, we'll manage." Her faith in him, unfailing and genuine, continued to be a source of strength. When Jenkins officially announced his retirement in May, Jackson accepted the nomination for sheriff with Hannah and the boys proudly at his side during the town meeting. The vote was unanimous, surprising Jackson but apparently no one else in Montezuma. "Told you," Frank grinned as the council presented Jackson with the sheriff's badge. "Town knows quality when they see it." That summer brought more changes as Montezuma experienced something of a revival. The railroad was expanding a line that would pass just 10 miles south, bringing new trade opportunities. Several new families arrived, drawn by affordable land and growing prospects, and Hannah's school suddenly had 15 new students. "We'll need to expand the schoolhouse," she told Jackson one evening as they sat on their porch, watching fireflies rise from the grass as twilight deepened. James was asleep in his cradle beside them, and Timothy was engrossed in a book just inside the open window. "Elizabeth is a wonderful assistant, but we simply need more space." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "The town's growing. Jenkins saw it coming, part of why he pushed me for sheriff. said we'd need someone who could handle the changes. "You're doing wonderfully," Hannah assured him, leaning against his shoulder. "The town feels safer with you watching over it." Jackson pressed a kiss to her temple. "All I'm really concerned with is keeping you and the boys safe. The rest of the town is a bonus." Hannah laughed, the sound still as clear and genuine as the first time he'd heard it. "Sheriff Sterling, I do believe that's the most undiplomatic thing I've ever heard you say." His arm tightened around her. "It's the truth. You three are my world." As summer faded into autumn, James took his first tottering steps, launching himself from the sofa into Jackson's waiting arms with a crow of triumph. Timothy started 3rd grade, proudly carrying the new slate Jackson had ordered all the way from Denver. Hannah found herself teaching more students than ever before, the expanded schoolhouse barely containing the 30 children now enrolled. And Jackson settled into his role as sheriff with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. Under his watch, Montezuma remained largely peaceful, despite the increased traffic and commerce. He hired 2 deputies, trained them thoroughly, and established regular patrols that deterred most trouble before it began. On the first anniversary of James's birth, as they celebrated with a small gathering of close friends, Jackson found himself momentarily overwhelmed by the fullness of his life. Watching Hannah laugh as she helped James blow out his single candle, seeing Timothy's protective pride in his little brother, feeling the respect and affection of the townsfolk who had become like extended family, it was more than he had ever dared to hope for after those dark years of grief and vengeance. That night, after their guests had departed and the boys were asleep, Jackson and Hannah stood together in the nursery, watching James's peaceful slumber. "He looks just like you when he sleeps," Hannah whispered. "That same little furrow between his eyebrows, as if he's considering something important in his dreams." Jackson smiled, drawing her close. "He has your laugh, though, and your determination." "Poor child," she chuckled softly. "Between your stubbornness and mine, he hasn't a chance of being easygoing." They moved to their bedroom, leaving the door ajar to hear if either boy needed them. As Hannah brushed her hair before bed, a nightly ritual Jackson never tired of watching, she met his eyes in the mirror. "Are you happy, Jackson?" she asked simply. He moved to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "More than I ever believed possible," he answered honestly. "You saved me, Hannah. You and Timothy and James, you gave me back my life when I thought it was over." She set down her brush and turned to face him. "We saved each other," she corrected gently, "and we'll keep doing so every day." "Every day," he agreed, drawing her into his arms. As they settled into bed, Hannah's head finding its familiar place on his shoulder, Jackson reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the desolate cabin where he'd retreated to nurse his wounds, to this home filled with love and laughter, it had all begun with the sound of Hannah's laugh in a general store, a moment of unexpected joy that had cracked the shell around his heart. "What are you thinking about?" Hannah murmured sleepily. Jackson pressed a kiss to her hair. "About how sometimes the thing you're running from is exactly what you need most." Hannah's arms tightened around him. "I'm glad you stopped running." "So am I," he whispered. "So am I." Over the years that followed, the Sterling family continued to flourish in Montezuma. Timothy grew into a thoughtful young man with his aunt's love of learning and Jackson's steady nature. James developed into a spirited child with a quick laugh and a talent for finding adventure. 2 years after James's birth, Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Sarah, whose arrival completed their family circle. Jackson remained sheriff, guiding the town through its growth with fairness and wisdom. Hannah eventually became the principal of Montezuma's expanded school, mentoring new teachers as the population grew. Together, they watched their children grow, their love deepening with each passing year. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was still, they would sometimes sit on their porch and remember the lonely man who had wanted nothing but solitude, and the courageous woman whose laugh had reminded him that life still held joy. Remember how healing had come not in isolation, but in connection, not in retreat, but in reaching out. "I never expected you," Jackson would sometimes tell her, his voice soft with wonder even after years together. And Hannah would smile, that same smile that had first captured his heart, and reply, "The best things in life are rarely what we expect, my love. They're what we need, even when we don't know it." For Jackson Sterling, who had once believed his heart permanently shattered, that unexpected gift had been Hannah's laugh, a sound that had awakened him from grief's long slumber and taught him that even the deepest wounds could heal, that love could bloom again in the most barren of hearts, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage was simply to stay.